While everyone has been distracted over the last few days with the mis and disinformation bill, the government and the Liberal Party, or should we say the Uniparty, have snuck through what they call an electoral reform bill, supposedly, as they say, to level the playing field. But as usual, it does the exact opposite of that. This bill rewards the major parties with millions of dollars more of taxpayers' funds and locks in their dominant position, keeping out the smaller minor parties. Just go through the three major things that this bill does. Now, firstly, at election time, the parties get $3 for each first preference vote that they get. So at the last election, for every first preference vote the Liberal and Labor Party got, they received $3. Now, what they're doing, they are upping that to $5. So that results millions of dollars of more flying into the coffers of the Liberal and Labor Party and the Greens head offices. Now, what's important to note about this, the smaller parties that get less than 4% don't get a cent of this money. So in a typical seat, just go through a typical seat where there's 100,000 people turn up and vote on election day. The Liberal or Labor Party that gets 40%, well, they would get, that would give them 40,000 votes by $5. So they would get $200,000 from the taxpayer to help pay for their election campaigns. So the Greens get 10%. Again, that's 10%, 10,000 votes at $5. They would get $50,000 of taxpayer funding. But where you have a group of smaller minor parties, say it might be the Libertarians, One Nation, the UAP, if they get 3.5% each, which combined is actually more than the Greens, they get zero. They don't get a cent because each individual party's total was less than 4% threshold, so they get nothing. So again, this is the way of millions of more dollars flowing to the major parties and shutting out the small minor parties and new and upstarting parties. And again, all done at the taxpayer's expense. Now, the second thing this bill does to rob the taxpayers and get more money from the taxpayers to give to the Liberal and Labor parties is they reward, this bill rewards each of the major parties with $30,000 extra funding for every sitting member that they have per year. So over a 3-year term, that's $90,000 for every sitting member. And for a senator, it's half that. It's $45,000 over the 3-year term. So here in New South Wales, that's an extra around $4.7 million going to both the Labor and the Liberal Party without an extra cent going to any of the minor parties. $4.7 million of taxpayers' money on top of that extra $5 that they get are going to these major parties, again, widening the gap between the major parties and the smaller minor parties. Now, the third trick that they're doing here is putting a so-called expenditure cap on for each individual seat. Now, while that might sound reasonable, they say, oh, this is to level the playing field, they say. But what you have to remember, that expenditure cap doesn't include the expenditure of a sitting member of parliament that they get from the taxpayer. So when the sitting member of parliament, and you're running an election campaign, you as a sitting member are being paid a wage while the person challenging you from your seat has to take time off from their work and do it out of their own pocket. It's the same with your travel expenditure. As a sitting member of parliament, you get paid to travel around your electorate. You get a car allowance, but the person challenging you during election campaign, he's going to fund all that out of his own pocket. The same with your office expense. You can run your electoral campaign from your federal parliamentary office that you get with your computer systems and your printers, while someone challenging you has to pay for all that out of their cap. Not to mention, the big one is the $160,000 that every federal member of parliament gets every year for what they so-called communications expenses. So you would utilise that as a federal member of parliament, that $160,000 paid for by the taxpayer to help promote yourself to get elected. But of course, the person challenging you not only has to fundraise that, but he then has a cap as where that $160,000 that a sitting MP gets from the taxpayer is not within the cap. Then there's the staff. Again, as a sitting member of parliament, the taxpayer pays your staff to go out and campaign on your behalf, not included in the cap and paid for by the taxpayer, but a person challenging the sitting member of parliament has to pay that all out. They have to raise the money, find volunteers, and again, that all comes out of their cap. So this legislation snuck through by the Liberal and Labor Party. It gives millions, tens of millions of dollars more to the major parties. It puts the major parties at a competitive advantage over the smaller minor parties. And again, it's what you'd expect from the Uniparties, just trying to entrench their position and keeping their control on the levers of power.